everyone to this very special spooktacular edition of On the Sofa. Our theme this month is Haunted Scotland, so tonight, following this theme, we are joined by the fabulous Annie and Jerry from the Stories of Scotland podcast to share with us their stories, their favourite stories of witchcraft and Samhain. Those of you who joined us for Scottish mythology in September will have already heard the magical and mesmerising tales from Annie and Jenny about fairies. So no wonder you've returned to hear more. And if you haven't tuned in yet to the Stories of Scotland regular podcast, then I definitely recommend you do. I'm an avid follower and their storytelling is quite fascinating. So, Annie and Jenny, you both admitted you have a childlike fascination for ghost stories, which is why we knew you were perfect for tonight's show. So, on this Halloween edition, where should we begin?
I would just like to say that my childlike fascination with ghost stories does come from my mother, who is even more fascinated than me. She's one of those people that like falls asleep listening to podcasts with like scary stories, and then she's like, "Oh, I didn't sleep a wink last night." I'm like, "You don't see," but she won't stop.
So shall we begin with some of the traditions around Halloween and then delve into some brilliant witchy stories, Jenny? Does that sound good?
That sounds perfect. So I guess the first and the main thing is that although Halloween is... so I lived in America for 5 years and they love Halloween. It's like their Christmas, honestly. They just go wild for everything Halloween. And I don't think a lot of them know that its roots are in Scotland. Like, this is where all Halloween traditions come from, old Scottish or Celtic traditions, which is really, really interesting and also gives us a really nice, deep history of various traditions that people have done at this time of year. And one of the reasons that it is this time of year that we have these spooky happenings is that this is the traditional holiday of Salween. I think I'm saying that right, Annie. I know there's a few different pronunciations.
No, I was thinking as I said it, that is completely the incorrect pronunciation. And we were talking before about people emailing you after the podcast to tell you off your pronunciation, and I was feeling that email coming my way. So, yeah, your pronunciation is correct.
Okay, because it's spelled Samhain, but its pronunciation varies place to place. But this is a holiday where people have traditionally come together at the end of the harvest. So the majority of food is harvested. There's ample supplies, and it's also when a lot of the light is dwindling and the cold, hard months are coming. So this is kind of like the last time that people get together when there's plenty, when there's, still some warmth in the air and some light in the day, which is really important if, you're going back hundreds of years. This would have been a really important holiday for people or celebration for people. And what they believed was at this time that they were, well, in general, back then, they were much closer to sort of the spiritual world. And Annie and I we talk about this idea of a veil between the worlds, or as I like to call it, a beaded curtain between the worlds. And at this time of year, the veil gets a little thinner and the beads get a little bit more tangled. And so the holes are more easily accessed and passed through from spirits and beings and fairies and witches and ghouls, all just waiting on the other side for this time of year. And so a lot of the traditions that we have come from this sort of thinning of the veil, is a common way to say it. And it sort of looks at how people reacted to the idea that they were much closer to the spirit world than they usually are throughout the rest of the year. Yeah.
I've been reading a lot of Victorian interpretations of Samhain. And I came across this fascinating description that, so we know that this is the start of the dark half of the year in Celtic culture. And they were trying to make sense of it, being the time that we say goodbye to the sun presiding over our lives and hello to the moon. And we're making offerings not just to the spirits of the dead or the fairies, but also to the moon itself to kind of guide us in the dark months that are to come. And I think this leads on quite nicely to guising. Jenny, are you a geyser?
Oh, I'm a big geyser. I'm one of the biggest geysers you're going to find.
So our American friends or other parts of the world do call this trick or treating, where children dress up as something spooky or even not so spooky nowadays, and go around houses extorting sweets. And of course, it used to be mostly fruits and nuts that they'd be getting from their hassled neighbors. But what's your best ever guising costume, Jenny?
Oh, this again is just a tribute to my mom. She loved Halloween, mainly because there were 4 of us children that she had, 4 siblings, and she would just dress us all up in fantastic outfits. And I think my favorite one that we did was I was a serial killer, but I was like a big box of cornflakes. But I was like splattered in blood and had a big plastic knife. So yeah, she outdid herself every year, and I think that was my favorite one.
Okay, I think I had too many toilet roll mummies of the last minute.
Yeah, and you don't want it to rain on those nights, because then you just end up in a sort of a cast by the end of it.
But when you look at the reasons why children were dressing up, we get quite a few different explanations of where this originated. So one version tells us that it was to confuse all of the fairies and spirits and ghosts that have come into our world on Halloween evening and are trying to cause mayhem. And by dressing up as the spirit or even just another person, or often they wear elaborate straw costumes that end up making them look a wee bit like scarecrows.
Terrifying scarecrows.
Terrifying scarecrows. By changing the way that they look, they're going to confuse the fairies, and so the fairies can't snatch them away into the realm of the fairies. But then we also see explanations that they are collecting offerings on behalf of their ancestors, so the people of the clans who have passed before them, and they're collecting on behalf of these souls. And so when you're giving the fruit or nuts to the children dressed up, it's almost an offering to the fairies and spirits that have come out on Halloween, and the children are kind of collecting them on their behalf. So yeah, I think that's really, it helps set you in the mood of a true old school Halloween when you think about why they've got children dressing up as little gremlins and monsters.
And serial killers. The cornflake killer. But yeah, I think, and what they would do at these gatherings, so everyone would come together from maybe the village or maybe the few villages around, depending on where we are in the country. Everyone sort of had slightly different variations of similar celebrations, but they would often have massive bonfires, big celebrations, plenty of food, lots of socializing, and everyone was very aware that this was the time when, you could, not only could fairies come through and nasty, creepy, horrible ancestors from the past or whatever come through the veil, but we could also look beyond it too. It was sort of a two-way thing. So a lot of the games that particularly young adults would play, those who were sort of coming of age, so like teenagers, adolescents, would play these games where they look beyond the veil to try and sort of pick out their future and see what was in store for them. They've done their beat as the little creepy gremlin kids, and now they're ready to sort of turn around and look and see what they can divine from behind the veil. And so a lot of the games and celebrations that people would play at this time are sort of in this way to sort of see the person's future. And I think my favorite one that they would play is they'd all take off one of their shoes and then they'd lob it over a house, and then they'd run around the other side of the house and see which direction the shoe was pointing. And, if it was pointing northwest, then the love of your life lived in that direction. And if it was pointing south.
Have we just lost Jenny there?
I think we've lost Jenny mid-shoe story.
Shoe story. Okay, well, I know the shoe story. So...
Oh, well, that's which way's your shoe pointing?
Which way's Jenny's shoe pointing? I think it's pointing towards a bad connection.
I think it
is. So if your shoe landed upside down, then this would be seen as bad luck in your field of love. And if it didn't land at all, it meant you'd be needing a new pair of shoes because your shoes would be stuck on the roof of the farmhouse. There's a few other really unusual divination stories. Oh, is that Jenny back?
Well, she says she's still here, but we just can't see her, but we can't hear her. So I think we'll just have to carry on. And I think she'll probably pop up in a minute when the connection restores.
Oh.
It's me! Ah!
Hello, Jenny. I have just finished
spookiness.
I'm not sure what happened. I was really getting into it. But did you finish my favorite shoe story, Annie?
I just finished your favorite shoe story for you, Jenny. I'm so sorry. But I'm here just in time to give the divination of the watery eggs.
Watery eggs. That was also a great one. Let's hope we all figure out the end of this one. But what they would do is they would take a glass of water and some fresh eggs, and they didn't have plastic bottles back then, but you know how you can separate the yolk out from the egg whites? And I do it by like squeezing a plastic bottle over it and it soaks it out. I don't know how they do it old school. Annie doesn't agree.
That's not how I would do it.
That's the scariest thing about this, is how I prepare food. But they would have a glass of water and egg whites, and they'd sort of pour the egg whites into the glass of water. And depending on how many globules the egg whites formed, that was how many children they would have. And I did try this one last year, Annie, if you remember, and I messed it up and it sort of like all exploded and I did it, and I'm going to have like 17 kids, apparently. So I got to get on that. I'm way behind.
And then I think we had a really lovely oral history. Do you remember the flaming nuts, Jenny?
Oh, the flaming nuts, of course. The flaming nuts were also great. This, again, was used by sort of young girls and boys who are looking to the future. Who are they going to marry? And what they'd often do is they sort of sidle up to someone that they might have had a little bit of a crush on in the town, and they'd all be sitting around the big bonfire, and they'd both have their own little nuts. And so they put their nuts next to the fire on the hot stones round there. And it would take a while, and everyone would sort of carry on with the evening and the festivities, but they would keep an eye on their nuts on the side of the fire, because how these nuts acted when the heat finally got too much, and the rock got too hot, the flames got too bright, the nuts would all do different things, and depending on how the nuts sort of popped or cracked, or even burst into flames, would determine how this young couple's relationship would go. So sometimes, unfortunately, they would pop and crack and fire away from each other, and that wasn't going to work. Give up on it now. It's not going to happen. Move on. Go find another nut. Go find another girl. You'll get over it. And sometimes they would both smolder gently all night long until they eventually sort of become one by the end of the night. And that was a really good sign. But what you didn't want was for one to smolder and for one to pop away, because all that signified was a lifelong unrequited love between the pair. So they can be quite if you're living a couple hundred years ago and you're doing this, it can feel very viscerally real. So I do think people did trust the nuts.
I think we all need to trust our nuts, Jenny. And tell us, Anna, have you ever gone digging for apples?
Oh, I have. I think that's one of my favourite things to do. And my mum, there were always lots of apple trees at home, so there was always plenty of very not so sweet apples. Yes, definitely a favourite of mine.
Oh, magical! It's one of my favourite games as well. But I remember myself being particularly talented at it, but I think I was just a little bit rough and unafraid to get my hair wet.
I would always go in and just like come out with someone else's hair in my mouth and be like, this is terrible.
Oh dear. So is there some kind of special story behind Dookie for apples?
No, but there's a lot of, so the digging for apples is quite a modern thing from the past kind of couple of 100 years, but there's some lovely stories about divinations, again with the apple skins. And I think it's this kind of future telling that led people to play with apples so much at Halloween. So if you duke for your apple and then you peel the skin off and you throw it over your shoulder, it should give you the name of your true love.
Which is really funny because last night I was sitting on the couch with my girlfriend. We're eating easy peelers, so we just had our little tangerines, and I just like lobbed mine over my shoulder, and it didn't come out with the letter of her first name, so I just quietly kicked it under the couch, and I was like, okay, that.
Oh, Jenny, you need to clean your house. But what you were saying about the bonfires as well, I really love, because a lot of the sites of the Halloween bonfires, and we've got really good evidence of this in oral histories and those kind of testimonies, a lot of the places where they'd light really big Halloween bonfires are places that for hundreds of years people considered to either be haunted or to be occupied for fairies. I remember when we were doing an episode recently on Hallowe'en, the Mountain of Fairies, that was a prime place to be burning your Halloween bonfire, and you could see it for villages around as well. So they're really actively trying to engage with the supernatural on Halloween. It's not simply hiding from it, but getting the benefit of this superstition as well. Should we do one more future telling and then have a look at some really lovely witch stories that we've handpicked for you? Jenny, do you remember kale?
Well, speaking of hand picking, yes. So one of my favorite ones is that what these young teenagers would do is they'd go out into the fields and they'd very sneakily at night, they'd try and pick some kale and get away with it. And if they got caught by the farmer in their fields, he's like, that's my kale, and there's like 15 of you, you know, guys, this is getting ridiculous, then it would be useless. Any divination you tried to do with this plundered piece of, I don't know, lettuce vegetable, would be unlucky and not come true. So what they would do is they'd sneak in and they'd all go and get the bit of kale they were most drawn to and get it out of the ground and run away. And then they'd all sit down and look at this piece of kale. And depending on how the kale that they've taken, what it looks like, that's kind of what their future love will look like. So if you'd picked a really big, long piece, then your future love would be very tall. If you'd got a wee stubby one, then you'd have a very stubby husband. I think there were some other ones. Oh, if it was a crooked piece of kale, then they would have an uneven temperament. So, you know, might be a bit of a fiery relationship. If there was lots of dirt clumped on the roots of the kale, then they would be very wealthy. So you wanted to pick a nice big one with lots of roots, and that would signify that you're going to marry someone rich. And there's a really good story that comes from one of the islands, I'm not sure, one of the Western Isles, I can't remember which one, where there's a young girl who's sitting at Halloween night and all her family and friends are dancing around the fire, and she's just a bit lovesick, really. She's been seeing this boy and she really likes him, but he works out on the boats and he's miles and miles away in the middle of the ocean on this night. And as she's sitting there, she's looking at all the other young men around her and she's saying, you know, I do really like him, but I'm also not sure if this, you know, is it worth the wait? Is this the life I want of being, you know, waiting constantly, worried about my love being away on the dangerous seas, missing big holidays and things. And so she's looking around wondering, you know, if she would be better with another lad. And so she can't make up her mind. And she decides to go and pick a piece of kale and find out. So they're very near to the coast here. And she wanders down to the coast, and on her way, she picks her bit of kale. And she's standing down by the shores and she's looking at the kale in the darkness and the moonlight with the party all behind her. And as she's looking at it and trying to sort of decipher the type of man that she's meant to marry, is this the man on the boat or is this one of the men at the party? She doesn't know. All of a sudden, a knife flies out of the water and clatters beside her on the rocks. And she looks around. She's down alone on the shore. There's no one there. And so she sort of picks up this knife, a bit bewildered, and looks at the kale and doesn't really know what to think. And she's a bit scared, so she goes back to the party. But even that night, as she's going to bed, and she puts the kale, I think she just leaves the kale outside. I'll be honest with you. I was going to say she puts the kale in her drawer, and I was like, no, she doesn't. But she puts the knife that came flying out of the water in the back of one of her drawers, and she sort of puts it away. But even as she closes the drawer, she thinks to herself, I really do miss my love, and I am quite excited for him to come home. And, I think we'll wait a bit longer and see what happens. She's already feeling a bit more confident about the relationship. And so a few weeks pass, and finally her love returns. And as they're talking, suddenly it just pops into her mind, this knife. And she tells him the strangest story. She misses out the bit where she's, on the fence about their relationship. But she does say, I was down on Samhain night by the shore, and all of a sudden a knife came flying out of the ocean. And she runs away and she gets it out of her drawer, and she comes back, and her boyfriend's face just goes white, as pale as it is. And he says, on Samhain night, I was on the bow of the boat looking up at the stars, thinking of how much I missed you and how much I'd have loved to have been with you that night. And as I was there, I was carving an apple and eating it, and all of a sudden we hit a big wave and my knife fell into the waters and I never saw it again. And all of a sudden, here it is in his hand after having flown out of the water at his true love's kale questioning of their relationship, which is lovely. And they got married and lived happily ever after.
Oh, Jenny, that's such a lovely story, especially to bring the mood up with the story of happy love. So I can really bring it down again with a tragic story that's from a ballad that I absolutely adore. But since I'm truly a dreadful singer, I'm not going to punish you by singing it, but I will tell you the story, because my singing would be by far the spookiest Halloween experience for any of us. And I've heard singers saying that this story is over 500 years old, so we don't really have any idea how old this ballad is, but we know it goes really, really far back. And I do like to think of it in a kind of medieval age of magic and wonder. It's just got that whole air about it. So this is the story of a witch named Alison Gross, and she lived in the headland of the Grampians in the gorgeous northeast of Scotland. And I'm from the northeast of Scotland. I adore it. It's an absolutely magical land, especially when you see the sea mist coming in over the ocean, and it just perfectly blends the sea and the sky, and it feels like one of these kind of in-between places. Now, Alison was said to be the oldest witch in the North Country, with incredible supernatural powers. She was a shapeshifter, you see, and she could run in the glens as a rabbit, or she could fly in the skies as a magpie. And she had lived many lives in many different shapes and forms, and she had seen the rise and fall of the moon each night 100,000 times, and she'd burrowed down into the land of the fairies in the shape of a rabbit, and she had danced with the northern lights in the shape of a magpie. Time had withered and aged her body, but her powers as a witch were as sharp and strong as ever. Yet, for our Alison, there was a deep sadness within, for she had never known the true love of regular mortals. She had experiences with love. She knew the love that a bird had with the currents of the wind, or the love of a rabbit with its bairns in the safety of the earth. But she had never known the love of another person. And because of this, her heart felt heavy with sorrow. But she was a witch, and she was a woman of many powers, and so she set out to experience love. And she went out in perhaps not the most sensible way to find a person to love her. And she just happened to bump into the first person she could find on the road, and it was a traveling singer. Now, the singer was so handsome, with long brown hair and deep hazelnut eyes. And Alison was certain that this was the moment that she could discover the feeling of true love. And so she goes about her witchy attempt to seduce this traveling singer. She tenderly strokes the singer's head and combs out the knots of his hair. She thinks of the gentleness of a mother rabbit, teaching their babies how to hide in the long grass, as she cautiously combs the singer's hair. And when she's finished, that hair is as soft as silk. And Alison asks the singer, "Will you be mine? Will you be my love?" This is when our story doesn't go according to plan. The singer responded that Alison was the ugliest witch that they had ever seen, that no one would ever love her, and that their only desire would be to get as far away from Alison as they possibly could. Alison,
a simple no would have done, mate.
I know. It's like if you've ever tried online dating and someone gives you a really long reason why they don't want to see you, and it's like, mate, I don't even know you. It's fine. It's fine. You didn't need to go into this detail. And in the way that anyone would be, Alison was absolutely heartbroken. But she then thought of the magpies and how much they adored trinkets. And so she thought that she could win her true love with trinkets. So she brought the singer a shirt of the softest silk that was adorned with pearls. This shirt had even been owned by a fairy who Alison had danced with one evening when she burrowed down to fairyland. Alison also took out her favorite spellcasting goblet of shimmering gold. And I love this because the original ballad, it spends a lot of time describing this beautiful goblet. It's clearly her most prized possession. So she's offering the singer all of her wealth to show her generosity just for want of love. Yet, once again, the singer sneers at Alison that he would never kiss her ugly mouth for all the gifts in the whole world. And she is desperate and rejected and brokenhearted, and she is a very, very angry and vengeful witch. So she takes out her silver wand and she decides to curse the singer. She howls in anger that by the moon and the stars, this singer shall regret rejecting her affection so cruelly. Alison takes out an enchanted big green horn and blows on it 3 times. And then she wallops the singer with her wand, and that singer transforms into the most hideous dragon. The dragon stretches its wings, only to discover that Alison has shackled its hind leg to a deep-rooted, enchanted tree, and so it is trapped forever. This singer is now cursed forever to be beside the road where they met Alison. Except any passers-by who look upon this dreadful, hideous dragon are going to fear and mock and hate the dragon in the same way that the singer feared and mocked Alison. And it seemed that it would be this way forever. Alison, lonely, and the singer, a dragon, a big, ugly dragon stuck to a tree. If it wasn't for the magical powers that loosen on Halloween. Because on Halloween night, there was no one on this road. There was no one to mock or taunt the dragon. No traveling merchants or musicians. No peddlers of tin or soldiers on the road. because anyone with any sense knows to be indoors or very well disguised on Halloween. Yet, footsteps did come down the road, but they were supernatural footsteps. For down the cursed path came the very queen of the fairies herself. And she stopped beside the very ugly dragon with the top fairy emotion, which was amusement and entertainment. She was a strong and powerful fairy queen, and her whole fairy court was in attendance for Halloween, their favourite night of the year for mischief and mayhem. Now, the queen of the fairies was so entertained by the dragon that she stroked him 3 times on his bumpy, scaly dragon nose. And to her amusement, lo and behold, the dragon turned back into his original form as a beautiful singer. And then, in the original, and this breaks my heart a little bit, this is where the ballad ends. I prefer to imagine that the story goes full circle and that the singer goes looking for Alison and goes seeking in rabbit warrens and in magpie nests and hunts everywhere for Alison, and then eventually finds her in the moonlight underneath a rowan tree. And perhaps they could sit together, and the singer apologizes for being quite so cruel, and Alison apologizes for being a bit overboard when it comes to the seduction. And the singer apologizes for leading Alison on and then mocking her vulnerability. And perhaps the singer could comb Alison's hair as softly and with loving intention as Alison did his. And when her hair was perfectly smooth, Alison would realize that she was much happier as a magpie and fly away into the night. And nice. That's the ballad of Alison Gross, the oldest and, in some versions, the ugliest witch of Scotland.
Oh, that was lovely, Annie. That was great. So with these ballads, obviously you're telling it as a story. So if someone were to be singing this, would this be like almost like a 15-minute long show? You know, like how long would these things go on for?
You get the ballads. This one in particular, I've heard anything from kind of 5 minutes to 10 minutes of song, and it goes very true to the story that I've just told, with a lot of details about the gifts that are exchanged between them, and with the emotions and the comments that they throw at one another. And then a lot of the old ballads kind of run into one another. So even though we'll have ballads talking about different witches, you could very much imagine it was Alison, but in a younger life. I think Alison, to me, it feels like one of those names like Nigel, that I thought it was a very modern name, but I looked it up out of curiosity, and apparently Alison is first recorded in Scotland in something like the 12th century. So very old name.
I love one of my favorite things of researching in the last few months was Annie finding out that Nigel was not a new name, because she now brings it up maybe every week we hear about Nigel. She's like, it's just like Nigel being an old name. Like, I mean,
yeah, no, it was
known a young Nigels.
When we were looking up William Wallace, and was it Robert the Bruce? It was Robert the Bruce and his brother Nigel, and I was like, is Nigel a medieval name? But yeah, we need to get back to Halloween, Jenny. Back to Halloween. Have you got any witchy stories for us?
Yes, I've got one of my favorite tales, and it's an epic as well. It's a very well-known epic that's been told hundreds of thousands of times, and every time it's retold with the storyteller's voice and take on it. So now it is my turn to sort of put my own spin on this fantastic tale. And this is the tale of Mcphee's Black Dog. Now, Mcphee was a very well-respected lord on the Isle of Colonsay. and the people on this island and his family, it stretches back seemingly forever. They can just keep going. And it's said that the Mcphees themselves are descended from the fairies. So he's already shrouded in mist. And so because of this, a lot of his pals, his other lords and lairds and, brothers, uncles, Nigels, all that, will often ask him for help when, they get in a sticky situation, not just with, regular politics of the time, but also with the sort of more supernatural, situations they might find themselves in. It was always Mcphee that they would go to for help. I almost called him Nigel. His name was not Nigel that I'm aware of. And one day Mcphee was out in the forests of his vast estate, and he was riding through and he was hunting, and he'd had a rotten day. Usually, he's a great hunter and he knew his lands very well and he could track very well, but he'd had absolutely no luck. So he's got a bit of a grey cloud over his head as he's riding home for the night. And as he's going through one of the most beautiful ancient forests on the island, he sees a group of men, maybe 12 or 15 of them, standing all crowded around something. Now, of course, this is his forest, and who are these men? But he wasn't angry at all. He was just curious to see what they were doing. So he stopped his horse and he hopped off. And before he had even really got on the ground, an elderly man had stepped forward from the group. And he says, "Mcphee, welcome, join us." So Mcphee does. He walks over and the group parts and lets him in, and he sees what they're all looking at. Now, he thought it was a fire, maybe they were all standing around, but it wasn't. It was a litter of puppies. But these puppies weren't the regular puppies that he knew. In fact, he'd never seen little puppies like this or any dogs like this. And they were all varying colours, but they all had the most amazingly shiny coats. But there was one that had a black coat, jet black, not another colour on it. And he looked at this little black puppy. They locked eyes. And it was, the old adage, man's best friend. It was just like that, instantly. Now, the old man sees this happen. And he says, "Mcphee, you may have any dog from the litter, but the black one." Now, Mcphee, he's having none of this. They've got a soul bond going on right now. You're not about to tell me I got to take the brown one. So he's like, "Look, I respect that, but I'm not going to take nothing but the black one. Basically, I have to have this little black dog." And the old man nods and he thinks about it and he says, "Okay, you can have the black puppy, but know this: the dog will only do you 1 day of work in its whole life." And Mcphee goes, "Fair enough, sounds good to me." And so he takes a little black puppy and he puts him in his hunting gear and he saddles back up on his horse. And just as he's riding off, he hears the old man shout behind him, "Only 1 day, Mcphee." Mcphee goes home and everyone is enamored by this puppy, But soon they realize that it's not trainable like the other hunting dogs they have. It's not trainable like any dog they have. It doesn't even answer to its name. They're actually not even sure it knows its name. It's just sort of doing its own thing constantly. And people would come round and they'd initially be like, "What a dog, look at that. Look at this dog." And they'd try and, get its attention, call it over. They would ignore them, away with them, not interested. And they'd turn to Mcphee and they'd be like, "What on earth have you got this dog for? He's useless. You just have him put down. Why are you feeding him?" And Mcphee would just sort of smile and say, "Let the dog be. The black dog's day is yet to come." And everyone would just be like, "All right, mate, your money. You're good meat you're feeding that dog." And over time and years, the dog grew up and lived amongst the family quite happily. But it was just sort of like, it was almost like a ghost in the house. It just did its own thing, wandered around, would snuggle with you if it wanted to be snuggled, would ignore you if it didn't, and it would be fed every day. Now, well, the rest of the family were just like, "I forgot this dog. Mcphee was always very fond of it." And was just, let it be. The black dog's day is yet to come. Now, one day, years later, 16 men from another island come over to go on a hunting trip on Jura, which is another island, a third one. Now, Jura at this time was uninhabited, but it was filled with deer, so it was a great place for hunting. So the 16 men and Mcphee all load up the boat and they get all their hunting gear in, all their supplies, and they get ready to sail over to Jura. And one of the guys is like, oh, bring your dog. Come on, big black dog. And the dog just kind of sniffs at the boat and wanders off. And they're like, that dog's useless. That dog's useless. And right as they were about to set off without the dog, the weather closes in. And it just completely, the waves pick up, the wind starts, the rain comes lashing down, and they have to call off the trip. There's no way they could make it over to Jura. And so the next day, all a little bit more hungover than they were the day before, they get all set up again, they get ready to go, and they call off the dog again to get on the boat. Nothing. Doesn't care. Doesn't even look at them this day. And Mcphee just sort of chortles and say, the black dog's day is yet to come. And again, just as they're about to set off, the weather closes in horrendously and they all have to rush back inside. Now on the third day, beautiful. Not a cloud in the sky, birds chirping, clear, fantastic day for hunting. Just a light breeze, so the midges, were just swept away on it. It was perfect. And they're loading up the boat again, and this time, they don't even bother calling to the black dog. They don't even want to. But right before they go, Mcphee sort of calls back into the forest where it's sort of standing back and goes, "Black dog, would you like to come?" And it does. It comes bounding out of the forest and it leaps majestically, black hair shining in the sunlight, and lands as if it were a leaf in the boat. And all the men at this, they were like, "Oh, what a majestic dog. I'm sorry about all those times I told you to kill it." Now, it's in the story, what can I say? And Mcphee sort of chortles and says, it seems the black dog's day is approaching. And so they set off and they sail to Jura and they have a fantastic day hunting. Everything goes brilliantly. It's beautiful. But it's too late and they sort of decide, you know what, we're having a great time. We'll all just stay on the island for the night, head back tomorrow. Now, they all knew of a cave on the island that many people would sleep in. It was very high quality for cave standards of the day, which are probably like the same as cave standards of today. I don't think they've really increased much. But so they're in this cave, all 16 of them, and it was a full moon. And it was really interesting because the cave had almost like an inbuilt skylight at the top, at a hole in the top, which the full moon was just sort of moving into. And as the full moon started to move in and shine down into the cave, the 16 men in there all start lamenting that there's no woman, there's no one to dance with. It's all just the men, and they've spent all day together as it is. Oh, if only there was a girl to dance with. And each one of them sort of lamented their wish for a woman to dance with in the cave that night. And Mcphee, he goes, "Oh, not me. I'm quite happy that my wife doesn't have to sleep in a cave for the night. I'm happy that she's at home and I'll rough it out in this fancy-ish cave, I suppose." And by this point, the moon had sort of moved, so it was now directly overhead and it was lighting up the cavern beautifully. And just as it slotted into place over the hole, 16 beautiful maidens would all sort of come in slowly into the cave, all dressed in green, all moving as though their feet are barely on the ground. And one by one, they reach out their hand and pull up one of the 16 lads to dance. Now, Mcphee, of course, he hadn't lamented not having a maiden to dance with, and so there was no maiden for him. And as he's sort of watching the men all dance around and they're swirling and dancing, and it's almost like he can hear music, although there's no one playing music there. And they're going faster and faster and they're all having a great time. And Mcphee's just sort of watching by the side with his big black dog. And all of a sudden, sort of as the night progresses and the moon slides out from the skylight and it finally passes over completely and the cave is plunged into darkness. And in this darkness, there's suddenly a horrible, terrifying scream from one of his companions, a scream accompanied by the blood-curdling sounds of attack, of biting, of like an animal attack. And again, another one of his friends is letting out a roar of terror, and another, until all 16 men are screaming and there's something horrible happening. And the big black dog, its hair is all standing up and it's out in front of Mcphee, pacing in front of him. Because when the screaming stops, Mcphee can feel 16 maidens' eyes turning to look at him. And the big black dog gets up and it starts growling and it starts howling and roaring. And as the 16 maidens start to approach, each one more gruesome looking than the next, the black dog barks and growls and snaps at them until they back off, until finally he rounds them up and he chases them out of the cave, leaving Mcphee in the darkness alone. But he can hear outside this battle raging, the howls and the yelps and the screams of the maidens, until eventually the night falls silent and Mcphee stays huddled in the corner of his cave, too scared to move. When finally the sun rises in the early morning mist of coming off the sea, he can see in front of him the bodies of his 16 companions, each one a husk completely drained of all blood that was in it before, little shriveled raisins. And slowly, as he paces around them, he sees the black dog coming back into the cave. And it's wounded, and it's limping, and it's not doing well. And it lies down at his feet, and it dies. Now Mcphee, companionless and dogless, has to go home. So he sets off and he sails back to his island alone in the boat. And when he gets there, everyone's asking, where is everyone? Where are your friends? Where's the big black dog? And all Mcphee can muster to say is, aye, the big black dog had its day. And that's the story of Mcphee's big black dog.
That's a brilliant spooky story, Jenny. That's from the old Gaelic lore around the Bowan She, the mysterious dancing, blood-draining woman who are kind of almost fairy vampire witches who disguise themselves as beautiful, innocent women and lure men in and then use their powers to seduce the men, and when they least expect it, gobble them up.
Devour them.
But it's a very good Halloween story, and it's one of my favorite pieces of Gaelic lore, just because I love the idea of being like, oh, I'm so sweet, I'm so lovely, I'm a cannibal.
And also the saying I heard before I knew this story, I knew the saying, every dog has its day, where, you know, even like if everyone has their chance, you know, it's sort of a lovely way of saying, you know, that everyone shines at some point. And it's derived from this story, which is really great. Yeah.
I love the idea that, because when you were describing the big black dog, I was imagining just like a regular cat. Like the exact behavior of a cat that just kind of ignores you and does no work.
Doesn't know its name.
And then one day it's just going to save you from all of these evil supernatural creatures. So maybe that's why cats are so distant with us and why they don't do any work, because they're just waiting for that one day that they can save us from the beings of the supernatural world.
Yeah.
But Margaret, should we open up to questions if anyone has any questions? Or
see who's listening.
Who's listening? Macarina's definitely enjoying the stories. I feel like I've been on a roller coaster of emotions. It's Halloween, but we've touched on love and we've touched on so many different things, and yeah.
Is there anything scarier than love? That's the real question.
I've never really thought of it before, but so many of the superstitions about how to tell the future are all about finding love. Mm-hmm. And then both the stories that we told had this aspect of what it means to be in love, with the witch just seeking someone who she's found on the road, or Mcphee choosing to remain loyal to his wife in a cave full of these seductress witches. So it's funny, I guess. I guess all of these kind of big festival holiday days are all about these not just fairy creatures, but also these really massive, powerful emotions that scare us all, because they do keep cropping up in the stories that we're reading.
Well, perhaps we can you have we all go through love ourselves, or hopefully we do at some point. So you have that kind of affinity with that feeling, don't you?
Mhm.
So that's why I think that's why we love them so much, isn't it? We can relate to it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And I hope everyone's enjoyed the spooky stories as much as I have. I feel like I've just sat here mesmerised. So if you've loved the stories, you can find more from Annie and Jenny on the podcast, which is on almost every platform. You'll find it on Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube. And next week on the sofa, we move on to the next festivity on the agenda. So maybe it feels quite soon to mention the C word, but because we do so many custom-made products, we do need a little bit of time to make them. So we always plan for Christmas a little bit earlier and ask our customers to do the same. So join Monia and Liam next week, and they're going to take you through some clan-inspired gift ideas with lots of history and stories of Scottish traditions thrown in. So I can't wait for that. But meantime, thank you very much, Annie and Jenny. It's been a fantastic night. Great to have you with us, and hopefully we'll be back soon.
Yes, thanks so much for having us.
It's an absolute pleasure. And the rain has just started on my roof. It's very noisy. I'm not sure if you can hear it. So this is perfect timing for us.
Proper spooky. Enjoy Halloween.
Thank you so much.